What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Fight Dialogue. My name is Tim, and this is Ask Me Anything Live. And some basic housekeeping right off the bat. We're going to focus on a few elements of the past most recent events. You know, the Tyson Fury fight, UFC Fight Night that took place over the weekend. We're going to talk a little bit of Bellator as well, and a little bit of Jiu Jitsu. And then after that, I'll open up the chat and answer all of your questions. And I already have some questions that I got to answer from people that posted in the community tab. The other thing that I want to mention and actually apologize for right away is the background noise. So I woke up yesterday and there was a construction crew on my street working on the pipelines for whatever reason. And they were all the way down the street. So I thought, okay, I should be able to schedule my live stream for tomorrow. And I wake up this morning and there's like a 4-foot deep trench in front of my driveway. And the construction crew is right outside my yard. So if you hear noises and beeping and slamming of things in the background, I apologize. I hope it's not too obnoxious and it doesn't ruin my live stream. But we'll try to carry on and have a good show. So the first thing that we're going to talk about here is the Fury and Wilder fight. I'm not going to lie, I only saw like highlights, but they were extended highlights. It was like a 10-minute video worth of highlights. And another disclaimer is I'm a boxing casual. You know, I practice boxing from time to time, and I watch it from time to time, but I'm not as into it as I am MMA and Jiu Jitsu. But from what I could tell, it was one of the best title fights like ever. Not just heavyweight, but like in boxing history, from what I could tell. I thought Wilder did a lot better in this fight than he did in the second fight. And to me, this fight seemed more exciting than even their first fight. I know they both had knockdowns in the first fight. Or did Fury have a knockdown in the first fight? I know he won like a majority of the rounds, and then he got knocked down towards the end, and that's where he kind of rose from the dead. But I can't remember if he had any knockdowns in the first fight. But anyway, the knockdowns were crazy in this one. Who was it that got knocked down first? I think Fury got knocked down in the fourth round twice. They were kind of weird knockdowns too. He was like coming forward aggressively, and Wilder landed some straight right hands on the forehead. And then as Fury was kind of stumbling forward after getting hit by that, Wilder followed up with a left hook for one of the knockdowns. And then I think there was a right hook on the second knockdown. But either way, he kind of clipped him on the ear as he was stumbling forward. So the knockdowns looked a little weird. They didn't look as convincing as they could have been. But a knockdown's a knockdown. And then at one point, Wilder got knocked down. And then in the 11th round, I believe, just Fury just absolutely overwhelmed him up against the ropes. But like I said, Wilder put up a good showing, man. He threw a lot of straight punches. He threw a lot of jabs, and he attacked the body a lot. He had that nice long jab to the body, especially in the beginning of the fight, which is a smart strategy against Fury because he's a guy that is going to have the movement and speed advantage over pretty much everybody he fights. I don't know how the fuck he does because he's enormous, but he just does. And I guess Wilder was trying to take some of his energy away early on in the fight. And I guess it didn't work out for him, but it was still an epic fight, an epic trilogy. I don't really want to comment too much on like the kind of excuses that Wilder makes after his fights. I mean, he's a guy that's just not used to losing. He's just not. And kind of leave it at that. And Fury, if I don't know how you could dispute him being the best in the world at this point. Like he's clearly the best heavyweight boxer out there right now, undisputed in my opinion. And yeah, welcome guys, welcome. Good to see you all. So I just talked about the Tyson, Fury, and Wilder trilogy, which was awesome. And there was a bunch of events that took place over the weekend. One of them was the UFC Fight Night. I won't go over the whole thing, but it wasn't a bad card. Had a bunch of good finishes, had some good submissions. The fight between Mackenzie Dern and Rodriguez, I forget what her first name is. It was a good fight, and Mackenzie Dern actually did better than I thought she would. I know she was the favorite going in there, but I had Rodriguez winning that pretty early with her striking, because Mackenzie Dern, she's game, dude. Like, she'll get after it, and she'll come forward and she'll throw shots until she can manage to clinch up with you. And her striking has come a long way, but it's still not anywhere near Rodriguez, in my opinion. And she made it work. She made it work, and she came forward just like I knew she would, and managed to get it to the ground. Rodriguez has decent grappling, and I knew that before the fight. And she really showed it off in this fight against Dern. Dern was clearly in control through most of the grappling exchanges, and had more submission attempts and definitely scored more on the ground. But that Darce choke attempt, was it a Darce choke or an anaconda choke? It was one of those chokes that Rodriguez attempted. It was fucking tight. Like, it was tight. That was probably the closest the fight came to ending by submission throughout the entire fight from either woman. So I was impressed. I was very impressed by Rodriguez. And I was also impressed by Dern for making it to a decision, because like I said, I didn't think she was going to win that fight. I thought she was going to eventually get overwhelmed with strikes and get knocked out. The strategy is a little bit questionable by Dern, because she had great success on the ground. In that fifth round, she didn't attempt a takedown until the last 30 seconds. So I'm not sure what malfunctioned in her brain there, but she was eating shots as she was attempting the takedown, so maybe she was just a little bit tired of getting hit in the face, which I can understand, I suppose. But yeah, not a bad card. On paper, it's horrible, but it turned out to be halfway decent. The next UFC card coming up is another one that just looks like dog shit on paper. I'll kind of go over that a little bit later, but hopefully it's one of those that is a pleasant surprise. So, a few more things to talk about before we open up to questions. Bellator 268 is looking pretty fun. It's looking pretty good. It is the light heavyweight Grand Prix semifinals, I believe, or half finals, whatever they're called. The one right before the end of the tournament. And we've got Vadim Nemkov. You know what? I'm going to pull it up on the screen here. Vadim Nemkov. There we go. And he is fighting Anglicus. I think his name is pronounced. And I did some research on Anglicus. Julius Anglicus, his name is. And from what I can tell, he is a very technical and well-rounded fighter. He only throws straight punches, super crisp, super clean, right down the pipe. His takedown defense is quite good. His wrestling overall is quite good. And he matches up really well against Vadim Nemkov, the champion. Nemkov's record is 14-2. Look at that. And then Anglicus, we got 10-1. So I think that's going to be a very good card. I'm sorry, a very good headliner. Anglicus is actually a fill-in for Rumble Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. I think Rumble Johnson got injured, and he's now out of the tournament. So we'll see how he does. But I think it'll be a competitive fight. The one thing that I will say about Julius is that most of his most recent wins are by decision. So he's not one to really finish a lot of fights, at least not recently. So that's definitely an advantage that Vadim is going to have over him. But look at how big he is, 6'3". That is pretty darn big even for light heavyweight. And then the other fight on that card, the co-headliner, is Ryan Bader and Corey Anderson. And I mean, Ryan Bader is still good, don't get me wrong, but I honestly think that Corey Anderson is in the prime of his career. Despite not fighting in the UFC anymore, I think he left the UFC on a win. Actually, no. Did he get knocked out by Glover Teixeira in his last fight? You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But still, Glover's fighting for the title soon. So I think Corey Anderson should have that fight. He's going to avoid Bader's wrestling, and I think he's a more aggressive striker than Bader. So that should be good. And then look at the undercard here. Brent Primus and Benson Henderson. I like Brent Primus, man. Anybody that can pull off a Gogo Plata, I'm gonna get behind that guy. And Henry Corrales, Vladislav Parubchenko. Not a bad card, not too shabby at all. And that takes place this Saturday. So I'll be watching that, and we'll see how it goes. All right. Guys, I will again mention, as I did in the beginning, and apologize for the construction that I have going on outside my house. They jumped me. I woke up this morning and they were right at the foot of my driveway with all their heavy machinery. So they're making a lot of noise in the background, so I hope it's not too loud. All right, moving on to the last thing that I wanted to cover before we get to the questions is Jiu Jitsu tournaments, man. And those of you that follow the channel, you know I'm a Jiu Jitsu guy. You know I love doing Jiu Jitsu. You know I love all the Jiu Jitsu guys that are in MMA right now. I love grappling in general. But there's a lot of Jiu Jitsu tournament formats out there, and none of them are really that spectator friendly. The Jiu Jitsu Worlds are happening right now. And it's tough. It's tough as a spectator to keep track of it. It's worse than the Olympics. You know, you got so many matches going on per day, per hour, and the IBJJF tournament rules are just, I don't know. I'm not really for point scoring rules for jiu-jitsu. You know, there's definitely worse ways to score a fight, but it promotes a certain type of stalling tactics, honestly. And a lot of people like the ADCC rules, but I think that's too weird. It's like a hybrid where the first couple minutes you don't get any points, and then after you do, so then it makes you stall until the last 10 minutes or whatever the hell it is. I can't even remember. But it's a totally weird format. And then you have the tournament styles that I prefer a little bit more, which is like EBI rules, where they just roll for 10 minutes, and then at the end, there's like a shootout almost, essentially, like the jiu-jitsu equivalent of a shootout in hockey, where they give the one guy a position, and you have to try to submit that guy in that position, and if he gets out, you guys switch, and they trade back and forth. And it's like an overtime, and whoever wins that exchange wins the fight, which can be exciting. You know, there's been a ton of exciting things like that, but most of them happen when that format first came onto the scene in like the first EBI tournaments. Now we're seeing, especially in Submission Underground, where they only fight for 5 minutes and then go to an overtime. We're seeing a lot of people purposely stall throughout that entire 5 or 10 minutes and then wait until the end so that they can be gifted a position. And I think Mason Fowler is a fantastic grappler. He's really, really good. And technically speaking, he has 2 wins over Craig Jones. But in any other format, like, he's not going to get Craig Jones back. Like, Craig Jones is too good for that. He was gifted the position both times, and both times was able to convert and win. But I don't know, man. I'm not liking that format either. So over the weekend, we had Craig Jones versus Davy Ramos. And if you're not familiar with who Davy Ramos is, I think he's an ADCC champ before he came to the UFC. And then he did okay in the UFC. It wasn't the greatest showing. He didn't really get to use his jiu-jitsu like I'm sure he wanted to. But yeah, those guys had a match, and it was, I forget how long the time limit was, if it was 15 or 10 minutes, but the entire match was those 2 guys stalling. And it really came down to one scramble that they had where, of course, they rolled out of bounds. And then there was a big argument over how they should restart, what position they should restart from, and who should get what. And it just devolved the entire match and took any potential fun that could have happened away from it. And as I'm watching it, I'm just like, this is a damn shame. Like, jiu-jitsu is such a great martial art and such a great sport. Like, it really should have a better format for spectators. But I don't have the answer. I don't know how they would do it. In Polaris, they just let them fight for however long, and if no submission happens, then it goes to a judge's decision, kind of like an MMA fight. And clearly that doesn't work that well either, you know? So I ask you guys what your opinion is on how the format of a jiu-jitsu tournament could be changed to make it more spectator-friendly, because that's what I want to see, because it's my favorite martial art. So that is my TED Talk. Thank you for coming. And let's move on to the questions. Let's open it up, y'all. I got some questions in the community tab that I promised I'd answer first. And the first one is from Max Mueller, and it is, when is the next How Good Is Edson Barbosa, Yair Rodriguez, or Rafael Fiziev striking video? As if I've already done one. I have not done a video on any of those guys yet. But they're all fucking awesome, man. Edson Barbosa is a legend. Yair Rodriguez is still coming up and is so exciting to watch. And Rafael Fiziev, man, a lot of people are sleeping on that guy. And he fights, who does he fight? Dude from New Zealand. Matt Riddle, whatever his name is. Matt Riddle? Or what's his first name? It's something Riddle. But anyway, that fight's going to be fucking awesome. Let's see if I can find it real quick. I think it's one of the events coming up soon as well. Let's pull it up on the screen. If it would load. Upcoming. It's not this next card, is it? Ugh, what a rough card. No, I don't think it's this next card. Is it the other fight night? I know it's kind of hidden somewhere where you wouldn't really expect it to be. Nope, not that one either. 267 is gonna be fucking nuts, man. That card looks so good. I don't see it anywhere. I'll check this one last card to see if it's here. If you guys know where it is, let me know where that fight is taking place, because that's definitely going to be a good one. Any Rafael Fiziev fight, I'm stoked about. That guy's a killer. Anyway, I'll find it later. But yeah, I would like to feature those guys soon. But as of right now, I'm sort of subjected to the whims of the YouTube algorithm and what is trending. You know, that's what gets the views, and I still have to grow the channel a little bit. So I try to cater to exactly what people vote for. As you know, that I put polls up, I do stuff on the Discord, but sometimes I kind of just go with whoever's fighting soon. So we shall see. But I definitely plan on featuring some of those more prominent name soon. Another question from Patrick Brannigan. Patrick Brannigan is actually my brother-in-law, and yesterday was his birthday, so happy birthday, Patrick. Let me answer your question. Personal matchups you'd like to see in the UFC and why? The fights that I always want to see are like the best grapplers against each other. And, you always see the classic striker versus grappler. And unfortunately, in my opinion, whenever you see grappler versus grappler, it ends up being a striking match. But I want to see the best grapplers in the sport fight each other on the ground. That is what is most interesting to me, is seeing how these guys adapt their jiu-jitsu game and their wrestling game and their ground and pound game in order to fight some of the best grapplers on the ground, respectively. And like I said, you just don't see that too often, because whenever the grappling is strong on both sides, it kind of cancels each other out. But I would have loved to have seen how Khabib deals with another world-class grappler like Charles Oliveira, on the ground. I wouldn't have wanted that fight to stay standing whatsoever. I would have wanted it to play out entirely on the ground. So those are the matchups that I look for. Damian Maia alluded to fighting Nate Diaz as his retirement fight, and I think that would be so good. Obviously, Damian Maia would have to deal with the striking of Nate Diaz, which is probably much better than his own, but I think Damian has what it takes to get it to the ground in that matchup. Nate Diaz historically doesn't have the best takedown defense. And then, of course, we would see whose jiu-jitsu is better, and I think we know the answer to that, but not in the context of MMA. So those are the kinds of matchups that I want to see. We got another question from Lucas Acevedo, who is in the chat. Welcome, my friend. Is wrestling the best background for MMA? Here comes my totally biased opinion right now. I'm going to say that jiu-jitsu is the best base for MMA, but you have to know how to apply it and to understand the weaknesses of jiu-jitsu. And there are many. Jiu-jitsu has many weaknesses. But when you look at not just MMA, but also self-defense, what is the one thing that is required out of pretty much anything? Like if you put a fighter in any situation, what is the one thing that he's absolutely 100% going to need against a well-rounded fighter? And that is going to be submission defense. You know what I mean? If you're put on your back, okay, that's obviously terrible. And you're obviously going to lose the fight in the eyes of the judges, okay, if you don't know how to get up. But you're definitely going to lose if you get submitted, or if submission is attempted on you and you don't know how to get out of it. And that's why jiu-jitsu was so strong in the beginning. In jiu-jitsu and UFC 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, there were wrestlers, there were judo guys, there were other grapplers that competed in those tournaments, but they lost. Why? Because they didn't have any real submission defense or defense that was on par with the submission offense. And in a street fight, you can get knocked on your ass by a punch, but then once it hits the ground, if the other dude that threw the punch doesn't know any submissions and you do, it's a foregone conclusion, Now, I think the more interesting question is, what is the best mix of styles for martial arts, or mixed martial arts? And that is why the sport was invented, and still to this day, I think is unanswered. Wrestling and jiu-jitsu is a strong combination, man. Wrestling and jiu-jitsu is strong. Because you have the wrestling ability to dictate where the fight takes place and when and in what position. And then you have the offensive and defensive submission knowledge to finish it there on the ground. So it's all about the mix of styles. There's no one style that's the best, but I think if you need one thing above all others, it's submission defense. Because if you don't have that, you're gonna lose a fight against even just a mediocre grappler. You know what I mean? If you have no submission defense whatsoever, you need it at least a little bit. But it is fair to say that in the higher level competition, you need a little bit of everything because the sport has progressed so much. So maybe I'm talking out of my ass, but that's the way I see it. So let's move on to the next question. We've got TK with, what do you think of both the UFC Glove Scandal and the Tyson Fury Glove Scandal? I'm not too familiar with the scandals that you're referring to. I know that Wilder was trying to say that Fury loaded his gloves or something along those lines, or he hardened his gloves to make him hit harder or something like that, which I don't think there's any real validity to. I think it's Deontay Wilder kind of making excuses. UFC glove scandal. I was not aware of a UFC glove scandal unless you're talking about how poorly the gloves are designed and the amount of eye pokes that take place as a result. But I was not aware of a UFC glove scandal. I'll have to look that up. Anus BA. That's an interesting name. How good is Jan Blehovich's stand-up? And does the Reaper have a chance against the Stylebender? I think Jan Blehovich has some underrated stand-up, but it is carried a little bit by his power. I will say that. He's super powerful, super dangerous at all times, and when you have a striker like that, it definitely helps and kind of bypasses a little of the technique that is required. But I think he's a very high-level striker, regardless of how powerful he is. I think he would have success even if he wasn't a knockout artist. In terms of the other part to your question, does the Reaper have a chance against the Stylebender? I think it's a bad stylistic matchup for him, no matter what way you slice it. And short of completely switching up his strategy, I don't see him beating Stylebender because it just feeds right into the Stylebender's game so beautifully. Robert Whittaker being a super aggressive, super blitzy, forward motion striker. And then the Stylebender, of course, is a masterful counter striker who is waiting for guys to do that to him. So, I mean, it's kind of like the rock, paper, scissors thing. You know, paper always beats rock. Scissors always beats paper. You know, in this one, Stylebender is the rock and Robert Whittaker is the scissors. You know, he's sharp, he's powerful, he's always dangerous, and he can beat most guys. But when you're going up against a stylistically very disadvantageous opponent, you're going to lose 9 times out of 10. So yeah, that's what I think. That's how I see their trilogy fight going. Right? It's trilogy fight? Or their rematch. How many fucking times have they fought? I'm losing my marbles. All right, we got a question from Arjen Poor. Watching Fury versus Wilder 3, are you now convinced that skill beats power and Francis versus Cyril Gane will probably play out the same way? And apparently he didn't like my Cyril Gane's defensive distancing score in that video, but that's okay. I get a lot of pushback from a lot of the scores that I give. I never discredited skill over power or vice versa. I always, well, actually I'm a liar. I do think the opposite. skill beats power. Skill before strength is my kind of motto for martial arts. But strength, athleticism, natural gifts, those are always going to be the tiebreaker, guys. That's why it 100% matters in all scenarios, but especially at the highest level, because any little tiny advantage can mean the difference between a world champion and a low-ranked fighter. Every little difference counts in terms of physicality, in terms of weight, reach, age, cardio, things like that. Because the skill amongst all those fighters is comparable, so you need a tiebreaker, and it comes down to their athleticism and stuff like that. So, yeah, man, skill is a huge deal, and Cyril is definitely a guy that I think has the skill advantage over Francis. But Francis is he's not underdeveloped as a fighter. It's just that Cyril Gane is more developed in his technique. And Francis has that power, man. The power is a huge tiebreaker, that could spell the end for Gane. I guess we'll see. I'm stoked for that matchup, though. Last question on the community tab, and then I can move on to the chat. Just a Goose asks me, to what degree can technical skill and talent trump genetic advantages? So this is kind of going along with Arjun Pour's question. If skill is more important, could that mean that in theory, Valentina should be fairly competitive at men's featherweight? If skill alone is not enough, how close should the genetic advantages be for it to be an even fight where skill can triumph? I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer. It's interesting that you bring up Valentina versus men's featherweight. Would she be competitive? Yes. But I still think she would lose most of those matchups because the skill is comparable, but the genetic abilities far outweigh Valentina. Just literally and figuratively, they're bigger, they're much stronger, their bones are denser. No matter what way you slice it, men are built physically, anatomically better to fight. It's just a fact, and I don't think there's any real argument about that. That's why there's such controversy over transgender, biological men or whatever you want to call it, competing in female MMA, because they've spent a large portion of their life being a man and developing as a man. And those advantages make a huge difference in a physical altercation or a physical competition. And this is why there's such strict laws and rules in the Olympics. I mean, there's women, biological women in the Olympics that have been disqualified because their testosterone levels are too high. These are natural women that just happen to be genetically stronger and faster, so on and so forth, and they have been disqualified. So there's a lot of ethics that go into when we're talking about male and female or male versus female, and it can get a little bit hairy in that regard and a little bit strange to kind of weed through all that. But if you have somebody that is exceptionally skilled fight somebody that is not, but is exceptionally physically gifted, you have a fair fight, I guess you could say. But it's hard to really pin that down because there's so many aspects to physical prowess and technical abilities. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down, but it's an interesting question nonetheless. So let's move on to some other questions here. Guys, welcome if you're just joining the chat. I apologize for the background music. I got construction crews outside. First question we've got is from Argenpor. Says, hi, good to see the live stream again. I do sometimes wish you could do this more often. I wish that myself. I try to do it at least once a month, but it's not easy, man. It's not easy with 2 kids and dogs and wives, and I only have 1 wife, but you know what I mean. It's not easy. But I'm trying to make some changes in my life to where I can do this more often because it's something that I really enjoy. So maybe someday I'll be able to do it like every day. Remy Havoc asks, what makes a fight entertaining to me? Plot twists. Not really plot twists, but just back and forth where the winner is never a certainty. I guess you could say that's the case for every fight, but for a large majority of fights, there's favorites and there's underdogs, and the favorites tend to win more, which makes a ton of sense. But then when you have guys that are so competitive and so close where it's really a toss-up, those are the fights that are most interesting to me, especially when the fight actually does take place and then they're going back and forth and you never know right up until the bell, like, who's going to win. That's what gets me most excited when I'm watching a fight. Lucas Acevedo, the Tony video was amazing, by the way. Thank you. And Patricky Pitbull's last fight made me think, elbows from the bottom position are very underrated. Do you think it will be more explored in the future? I mean, elbows from the bottom have been used forever. It's a very distracting thing to have to deal with as the guy on top. Like, it's really fucking painful to get hit with a chopping elbow like that when you're on top of a person. And a lot of the time it ends up causing cuts and abrasions, especially like up here in the hairline and stuff. I think that happened in the Volkanovski fight. Brian Ortega threw some elbows off of his back that cut Volkanovski's like skull right open here, and it was pretty nasty. It definitely makes the grappling exchanges more interesting. They're just not fight winners, though. That's unless you get lucky with the placement of a cut, they're just not fight winners. You're not going to knock a guy out like that. And unless the guy on top is doing absolutely nothing, and besides holding you in position, you're not going to win a fight with upwards elbows. But they can definitely help, and I think there's a fair amount of people that utilize them. Spoiler alert, I'm working on Weili Zhang's grappling right now. And my God, I spoke to the guys on the Discord about this. That woman is fucking vicious on the ground with her ground and pound. And it could be that, her level of competition that she fought against wasn't that high before the UFC. A lot of women that you've never heard of, I never heard of until I researched it. But regardless, it wasn't even competitive. It wasn't even competitive once it hits the ground. She just obliterated everybody, just clobbered them to death. And all those fights are on YouTube. You should go watch them. She had great elbows from the bottom. Fantastic elbows from the bottom. I think it was either her first or second fight in the UFC. She fought Aguilar, and she got her in a triangle, and she started throwing elbows from the triangle position. And that opened up the opportunity for the armbar. But going back to what we were talking about before, which is, can you end a fight with them? I know that wasn't your question, but that was a question that came out of me trying to answer your question. That is a relatively reliable means to end the fight with elbows from the bottom. Because when you're controlling somebody in a triangle position and they can't escape, now you're forced to eat those shots in order to intelligently defend yourself against the triangle first, because that is what has the most potential to end the fight, arguably. So you're trying to defend that, and while you're trying to defend that, you can't really stop the punches or the elbows from flying. So you could get a TKO that way from the referee. So yeah, before I go any more down a rabbit hole, check out those Weili Zhang fights. They're all on YouTube. Fucking fantastic. Tobias Brava, hello, Fight Dialogue. Fight Dialogue is the channel name, my friend. My name's Tim. You can call me Tim. Watched your video on El Kukui and loved it. Wanted to know your opinion on his projection from now on. Ideal fights for him, or if retirement is near for him. You know, I think he's still a high-level fighter, man. I honestly don't think he's going to claim gold ever again. And that's a sad truth, but I think it is the case. But man, give him some legacy fights. And what I mean by legacy fights is guys that are in a similar situation to him in his career. Put him in those fights. You know, I would love to see him versus Nate Diaz. That would be fucking awesome. They'd have to decide on the weight, might have to do a catch weight or something like that, but that would be so fun to watch. And that's what I want to see out of Tony, because win or lose, he always makes the fight exciting. So if you're a real Tony fan, it doesn't matter if he's winning gold or if he's winning absolutely nothing. You just want to see him fight. So that's what I think about that. Mathisha Nathmaka. How good was Matt Hughes? I need your answer on this. How good was Matt Hughes? You know, he wasn't a terrible striker, especially for the time. You know, he actually had half decent boxing for the time. And his grappling was otherworldly, man. Grappling was otherworldly. One of the best wrestlers to ever compete in the sport. You know, he's broke a bunch of records and stuff. He was fantastic. He was really, really good. As far as where he ranks, it's not comparable to pit him up against guys that compete in the sport today, because the sport has changed, and the guys of today are always going to be more skilled and adept than the fighters of yesteryear. But compared to the guys of his generation, he was in the top three, no doubt about it. Tobias Breva says Benson Henderson is on the Bellator card. Yep, it's going to be a good one. Jan Popovich. I want to ask for your opinion on Wilder versus Fury. While the fight was great, it was also very sloppy. I thought Fury had utilized way less feints than previous and almost zero feints after the fifth. Like I said in the beginning, I watched the extended highlights of it, so it was hard to get a real technical feel for the fight. I didn't pick up on the fact that he wasn't using feints enough. He did seem like he was getting hit way more than in the second fight. And I mean, that's evident by the knockdowns, but also just like he was just taking a lot of shots in between the rounds. Not in between the rounds, but you know what I mean. And I kind of attributed that to just Wilder doing better, but you may be right. It could have been a blunder on Fury's end for not sticking to the strategy that he has for so many fights. Lucas Acevedo. I believe Anderson got KO'd by Jan in his last UFC fight. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's what happened. Who did Anderson fight in his last UFC fight? I thought he fought Uriah Hall, if I'm not mistaken. I think that is the case. Arjunpur, do you think Magomed Ankalaev will be champion of the light heavyweight division someday? And what do you think of him overall? Ankalaev is good, man. He's got scary stand-up. I thought he was pretty well-rounded, but you know, when he fought Paul Craig, that triangle kind of ruined it for me. Like every time I'm like, oh man, Ankalaev's really good. I think back to that Paul Craig triangle where he was winning the whole fight. and then got submitted in the third round. And I don't mean to take anything away from Paul Craig because he's fantastic and he's got excellent jiu-jitsu. But I thought Ankalaev was better than him on the ground. Not just at the feet, but on the ground. So I was surprised to see him get submitted by Paul Craig. So if he works on his submission defense a little bit, yeah, maybe, because his striking is quite good. He gets hit a little bit, but he's getting better in each fight, I can tell. Francesco Genovese, good to see you. What do you think about the upcoming freestyle wrestling match between Khamzat Chimaev and Jack Hermanson? I didn't see that coming, but I don't think anybody did. Yeah, I didn't see it coming either, but that is an interesting matchup. It's been a while since I even went back and watched any of Chimaev's fight. I thought about doing a How Good Is Their Grappling about him, but I realized that I just didn't have enough to really analyze because he hasn't really been put in any kind of trouble. So that would make analyzing his defensive skills quite difficult. So I'm going to wait a few more fights until I got a little bit more information on that. And we'll see what becomes of his fight with Li Jingliang, because that's a very tough opponent for him. But I know that his offensive grappling is quite good, particularly his takedowns and his ability to pin guys on the floor. Jack Hermanson, he's got very good jiu-jitsu. His wrestling is okay for MMA, but I'm not sure why he would be willing to take up this fight with Chimaev. He's a little bit bigger than Chimaev, but holy crap, man. That is such a weird direction to go in, and I don't think it's the right choice on Hermanson's part. I mean, if you're just doing it for fun, then fuck it. But, yeah, I don't know. I think Chimaev wins that. Yusuf, how long does it usually take to develop high-level footwork? Well, I wouldn't know from experience because I don't have very high-level footwork. My footwork is pretty mediocre. I have a decent idea what to do against southpaws. I have a decent idea what to do in terms of positioning myself in relation to my opponent, in relation to the cage around me or the ring around me. I have an okay read on distance, but it's definitely not high level. How long do I think it would usually take? I really couldn't answer. A lot of the guys that I've trained with were not real footwork guys either. I've trained with some fantastic kickers, particularly Muay Thai kickers. Just next level kicking game. But in terms of footwork, yeah, I don't know many guys. Not in my area. The guys that really have good footwork are the European boxers. You see this is evident in like Michael Bisping, and Dan Hardy had some pretty good footwork. That it's part of their style. It's part of their game. They have great footwork. So maybe there's some British MMA analysts out there that can answer your question a little better than I can. It's a good question though. Jan Popovich, how hard did I coom when you heard that Fiziev versus Rydell was announced? Pretty hard. I coomed all over, and because that is such a banger, man. Rydell, what was his last fight? He fought somebody to the near death in his last fight, and it was fucking fantastic. And Fiziev, he's never in a bad fight. Trent Denzel, who do you got in Poirier versus Oliveira? Do you think Poirier will be able to finish Charles or the opposite? It's such an interesting matchup because they're kind of yin and yang in terms of their skill set. Like Oliveira is the better grappler, but is a surprisingly good striker as well. Poirier's a little bit more well-rounded, but in this matchup, he's the better striker, okay? But he has surprisingly good grappling. Not surprising to me, but I think it may surprise Oliveira. I think Oliveira will get that fight to the ground at some point and then realize, like, I can't submit this guy. Like, or just realize like it's going to be really, really difficult in order to submit this guy. And even given their advantages, respectively, I wouldn't put it past Oliveira to knock out Poirier. Because after that Chandler knockout, I was like, holy shit. And I wouldn't put it past Poirier to submit Oliveira. Because he's just so well-rounded. And he's got a good front headlock system, good guillotine game. And though that's what Oliveira has tapped to 2 or 3 times in his career. Anthony Pettis submitted him with a guillotine. Ricardo Lamas submitted him with a guillotine. Did somebody else submit him with a guillotine? I feel like they did. He's been submitted before. He's not without his weaknesses. So very, very intriguing matchup. If I had to pick gun to my head, I would say Poirier, just because generally speaking, he's more well-rounded. Yeah, man, he's at his peak. So I think Poirier will win that fight. I lost my place. Fuck. All right, Francesco Genovese. Do you watch Flow Grappling? There's an IBJJF no-gi tournament airing. Yeah, I also want to say fuck Flow Grappling because like the paywall and everything is just a pain in the ass. And I mean, I know everything's got to make money, but Flow Grappling I don't think ever had a problem making money. I think they're just kind of like, I don't know. I don't know if some corporation bought them or something, and it's just like if you have a fringe sport like jiu-jitsu, you want to get that shit out there to everybody, to share it with everybody, to make the sport grow. By putting it behind a paywall, you're making it difficult for the fans of the sport, and you're making it almost impossible, not impossible, but highly unlikely for people to be drawn into it, that don't know anything about the sport. So yeah, I watch it from time to time, not legally, but I do watch Flow Grappling. Tobias Briva. On Discord a while back, we talked about the upcoming fight with Jing Liang and Chimaev, about how Jing Liang was listed as a +300 underdog, sadly. If you could make the odds yourself, what would you make them? Well, I'm not very good with odds making in terms of like the actual numbers of it, because I don't 100% understand it. I know plus this or plus that, you're the underdog, and I know minus this, minus that, you're the favorite. But other than that, I don't know exactly how it works. I would put Chimaev as a slight underdog because he is very skilled. He is on the up and coming. There's hype behind him. And it's not unwarranted hype. He's very skilled. But he's been out for a while. And he's a little bit untested against the higher levels. Jing Liang has been in there. He's had some really impressive wins, especially recently. And he's easily the best male Chinese fighter, not just in the UFC, but probably in the world right now. So, and that says a lot, because China is coming, man. It is coming. We've got a lot of fantastic Chinese fighters that are building themselves up right now and may overtake the sport at one point. So yeah, I would put Chimaev as a slight underdog. What else we got? Trent Denzel, do you think Dan Hooker's striking will be enough to stop Islam? I want Dan Hooker to win that fight. I really do. But I don't think not that it's a bad matchup, but there's definitely better matchups out there for Mr. Hooker. His grappling's okay. His grappling's not bad. Against Islam, it's not even a contest, though. Islam has fought really good strikers before, dude. He's fought good strikers, and he's managed to come out on top, pun intended, And I don't think this fight will be different. I'm glad that he's finally fighting a very highly ranked, highly respected fighter. But yeah, I think Islam wins that. Who's fighting RDA soon? Wasn't Islam supposed to fight RDA? But then RDA got injured, right? And now Dan Hooker stepped in? Okay. I think that's right. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. The Brown Guys MMA, good to see you again, sir. How do you think that a prime Tony Ferguson would do against a prime Max Holloway? Elbows included. I don't know why elbows would be unincluded, but okay. Tony Ferguson's the bigger guy. Max hasn't had a lot of success at 155. Tony tends to have problems with guys that take him down. Max Holloway doesn't really go for takedowns. So it would really be a striking fight or a striking battle against a prime Tony. I still think Holloway is far more technical and would be able to outpoint Ferguson. So unless Ferguson really hurt him, and considering how good Holloway's chin is, I don't know if that's going to happen. Because Tony's got good power, but he's not like the most powerful dude. I think Holloway could win the striking battle. Yeah. Especially if it's a 5-round fight. Max Middleton, how long have you been a brown belt in jiu-jitsu? And when do you expect to be promoted to black belt? I've been a brown belt in jiu-jitsu since June of last year. I got my brown belt. So about a year and a couple months. And typically you make a pit stop at each belt for like 2 or 3 years, depending on how often you train. So I don't know. Maybe within the next year or so, if I'm lucky. And if I train hard, which I'll be trying to, I definitely want to hit black belt someday. I've got 1 stripe on my brown belt, so I got 3 more stripes to go. Arjun Poor, you're so on point about grapplers versus grapplers. I think Khabib would have demolished Charles with ground and pound, similar to how Volkanovski handled Ortega. By the way, would love Khabib versus Gilbert Burns. That's another interesting matchup. Gilbert Burns is very good on the ground. His jiu-jitsu game is a little bit, what's the word, displaced from his overall MMA game. Like, he uses his jiu-jitsu, but it's not quite adapted to MMA as well as it could be. Kind of like Jacare. Like, Jacare on paper is one of the best jiu-jitsu fighters in the world, hands down. Like, historically, like skill-wise. But when he came over into MMA, his most impressive wins were not by submission. They were by knockout. It's almost like he used his jiu-jitsu in reverse to just disincentivize guys from even touching him and just making it a strike-up battle, or a stand-up battle, I should say. And Jacare had good stand-up and incredible power, but I think if he adapted his jiu-jitsu game a little bit more to work in MMA against the higher level dudes, because the dudes he submitted were okay, but they weren't really anything. Like Chris Camozzi, like, who else did he submit? I forget who else he submitted, but yeah, if he adapted his jiu-jitsu game a little bit better for MMA, he would be a champion potentially. Gilbert Burns he falls into that kind of that scenario. I think he's adapted his jiu-jitsu game a little bit better than Jacare has, but there's still something to be desired there, I believe. Guys, I'm going to answer your questions for about another 10 minutes, so try to get in some good ones, all right? I'm burning through these. I think I might be able to get to all of them. Oh, if I don't lose my fucking place again. Buster Wolf, here we go. Tyson Fury said he wanted to go to MMA. What do you think? Who do you think should train him? Well, who did he train with? I know he trained a little bit with Darren Till. He trained a little bit with Nick Diaz. Who should he train with? He's got to train with somebody that can You just can't learn grappling that quickly. Like if he comes up and says, I want to do an MMA fight in 6 months, I'd be like, well, you better put him up against a scrub, because other than that, like, he's not going to win, because you have to have a longer time training in grappling. There's no anti-grappling, because anti-grappling is just grappling. You need to learn grappling in order to stop grappling. Tyson Fury, to my knowledge, does not have any sort of takedown defense. He doesn't have any sort of submission defense. He needs to be, I don't know, somewhere close to a blue belt level in jiu-jitsu, and have at least a year of wrestling training, before I'd say, yeah, he can stop a trainer, or stop a trainer. What the fuck? He can stop a takedown from a professional fighter that is well versed in that. In terms of kicks, now that is another interesting scenario, because Tyson Fury has fantastic head movement when punches are coming at him, but you have to, not completely, but you have to severely modify your head movement to take into account the danger of head kicks. But not just head kicks, but leg kicks as well, because when you're moving your head, what you're doing is you're taking your center of gravity and you're flip-flopping it back and forth. So you need to be very rooted in your stance to have good head movement. You can move your head a little bit as you're dancing around and using footwork, but that's more of a mobility game, and you're just kind of slipping punches that might be coming your way. But in order to have very like that dramatic head movement where you're bobbing and weaving and ducking, you have to be rooted in your stance. And if you can throw well, it's classic kickboxing. It's fundamentals of kickboxing. You throw a quick combination with your hands, or at least a jab, just to get them to react, to either block or to move their head or whatever, and then you throw a leg kick. Because that's just what's going to come next, because you're setting that guy up. So even if we're talking about a matchup for Tyson Fury that is not going to be a real grappler or some person like that, and we're just talking about another striker, the kicks, it's going to be difficult for Tyson to adapt his game to address that. But I think he's a good athlete. He's a smart guy. I think he could definitely make it happen, but you got to give him time. And I don't know if he's at the peak of his game in boxing. I highly doubt he has the time or the resources to really dedicate much of his brain power into competing in MMA seriously. Lucas Acevedo, who is the fighter with the best jiu-jitsu conversion to MMA, who uses a heavy grappling approach? Now, this is kind of what I alluded to a couple moments ago with Gilbert Burns. You can make the argument that Gary Tonin is amongst those of the best, but because his game is very grappling heavy. Like, he'll strike with you for a little bit, but you know exactly what he wants to do. He wants to get you on the ground and submit you, which he's been successful with so far in his career. And I can't wait for his title fight in ONE FC. But we are talking about ONE FC where not just the grappling level is a little bit lower, but the overall MMA skill level is a little bit lower. So maybe he's not the best example. Ryan Hall, I would have said, because his style was such an enigma. But clearly he has issues with overall strategy. As we saw in his last fight against, what's his name? Starts with a T. But anyway, yeah, he kept going for that very awkward roll into a leg lock. And I get it. It's part of his style. I get trying to use it the first 2 or 3 times, but even those first 2 or 3 times, he escaped by the skin of his teeth. He almost got knocked out in those first couple exchanges, and then he kept going to the well with it. Like, he just kept doing it. And it's like, dude, you're asking for trouble. All the fights prior to that, though, he was a complete mystery. Nobody knew how to deal with his ground game. And I suppose it took just somebody with a little bit of balls to just get in there and just hit him. Because most guys, as soon as he even goes to grab them, they're just out of there. They're just trying to run away, essentially. Demian Maia, historically and on paper, has been the best adaptation of jiu-jitsu to MMA. And I think with just a little bit better of a takedown game, a more diverse takedown game, Demian Maia could have been champion 2-3 times over. Because his system was so simple yet so sophisticated, and how he would end up in those half-guard situations, protect himself well from that position, look to take the guys back from there, and then it would just be all over. His wrestling could get it done against the lower level guys, but against the higher level guys, he would just dive in for a takedown, fail. Dive in for a takedown, fail. Dive in and fail. Who was his last fight against? But we saw that for the entire fight, for the full 15 minutes, where he attempted like 25 takedowns and just whiffed on all of them. So with a little bit more focus to the actual takedown itself, Demian Maia, I believe, is the best representation of jiu-jitsu in MMA. Yusuf asks, do you lose jiu-jitsu skills as you get older, say like the 40s? No. The loss of skill depends on how often you practice. Dude, I got injured in September. I sprained my MCL. It wasn't that bad, thank God. But it was enough to keep me out for about a month. And I felt myself lose a little bit because I was on a roll, man. I was training hard. I was getting ready for competitions that take place in the fall in my area. And I was watching John Danaher videos every day. And then when I got injured, I obviously stopped training and I didn't watch as many videos because I knew I wouldn't retain them if I wasn't actually practicing them. And I lost a little bit, I mean, 99% of my knowledge is still there, but, I lost my cardio for sure. And just a little bit of pep in my step and overall, like, my wit. Like, I'm not as quick on those submissions. I'm not as quick to catch those sweeps. So, age matters when it comes to like your physical ability to do something. But in terms of the skill, in terms of the technique, nah, man, you just practice it and you'll know it, No beeping, no slamming. I think the construction crew's on break. Thank God. They were driving me nuts. All right, what else we got? Argent Poor, I somehow think BJJ guys have a weakness against the best ground and pounders. Charles Oliveira, BJJ, had no answer for Chandler's ground and pound. Same about Ortega and Volkanovski. And I will tell you why. And this is a brutally honest assessment of not just jiu-jitsu, but of myself. I am a guy that loves the guard. I love to utilize it. I love submitting guys off my back. It's one of my favorite things to do. In MMA, and I have trained in MMA quite often. I've never competed in it, but I've trained in it often enough. With pretty much full force punches, mind you. And the trap that you fall into is you're fighting from your guard, and in a jiu-jitsu scenario, you feel pretty even. Like the guard position in jiu-jitsu is basically like 50-50. The guy on top has the ability to do some stuff in terms of, passing and scoring points, obviously not submitting, but passing and scoring points. The guy on the bottom obviously has the ability to submit and do all these things to you, but he's on the bottom, so he's technically losing. So you have this 50-50 situation. In MMA, it's more like 75-25 in favor of the guy on top. But if you're a good jiu-jitsu player and you are confident in your skills, you still feel like it's 50-50. Even if you get hit in the face, you're like, whatever. I didn't block that one, but we're still in a pretty close competition here. I'm 2 seconds away from submitting this guy. I'm trying to set up this triangle. Boom. And then you get hit again. And it's like, oh, man, okay. Here's my armbar. I'm going to set up my armbar. Boom, you get hit again. And it's like, unless you're very, very self-aware during the fight, which is kind of hard to be, because it's, you're in the moment, the adrenaline's pumping, and you're not thinking the same way you would if you were watching a fight. So the problem with guys like that is they fall in love with their ability to submit guys off their back, and not that they rely on it, but they overuse, I guess you could say. They overuse it. And that's why a lot of really good jiu-jitsu guys will get beat up by Sorry guys, did I lose my stream for a second there? I apologize. I don't know what happened. It just said it went out for a second. It says excellent connection now. Give me a thumbs up to know if you can, and let me know if you can hear me. I hope so. But anyway, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, we were talking about ground and pound defense for jiu-jitsu guys. It's relatively easy to protect yourself from ground and pound. Like, if you really know what you need to do, which is it's just reduce the space or get up. I got a thumbs up from Tobias. Thank you. You could just hug the guy around the neck or overhook and just hang on for dear life. You can lock up a body triangle from the bottom and just stop the pass. But then, of course, you're not doing anything to win the fight. You're going to lose the fight, and the judges' scorecards or just in the eyes of whoever's watching the fight. So these jiu-jitsu guys, they know how to stop ground and pound, but they're not just trying to stop ground and pound. They're trying to win. And what is the way that they know how to win the best? What is their most reliable means of winning a fight? It's by submission. So when they feel like they're, okay, I'm in the guard. This is a great position to go for submissions. Like, I'm just going to sit here and just choke this guy out. And they fall into that trap. And I feel for them, man, because I fall into that trap almost every fucking time myself. And I gotta tell myself, no, you idiot, get up, So it happens at a high level too, ladies and gents. All right, a few more questions, guys, before my stream fucks up again. That was weird. That's never happened to me before. For those of you that have been watching my streams, I'll try to jump around a little bit here. I apologize, guys. I'm not going to get to all the questions today. I do have to go to work in a little bit. But tail of the tape, I think he's talking about Corey Anderson when he KO'd Jan. Oh, yeah, before. Somebody said... I thought he was talking about Anderson Silva. Yeah, see, this is what happens when I'm behind a little bit on the questions. Anyways, Francesco Genovese, what do you think makes good genetics for fighting? I think there was an argument to be made that like the best physicality for MMA was like the John Jones body type. Super tall, super like long reach advantage, but also with just enough muscle to make the weight class. And I think there's still an argument to be made there because there's a lot of freakishly tall guys that have that advantage in different divisions. I think there's a guy in the lightweight division that's like 6'3" in the UFC. That's fucking disgusting. That's crazy. Lucas Acevedo, how important would it be for Charles to train with right-handed southpaws, since Poirier is one, or just train with regular southpaws? Can that do the job? Poirier is an interesting one. He switches stances like mid-combination. I don't see him switch stances that often, like at range. But yeah, Poirier's a dilemma, man. Poirier's hard to deal with. I don't know how many guys are out there that have the exact style of Poirier. he's really come a long way. I think you're right. I think it would be in Charles's best interest to try to find a right-handed southpaw. They're not that hard to find, but it is a little bit weird to find one like randomly, I guess you could say. Rajarshi Chakborty. Should the UFC cut Jones? I fail to understand how he has any fans left. Yeah, he's getting to that point, man. He's getting to that point. I think the UFC is kind of playing it by ear, given their history with Jones and how much money he's made them. They're playing it by ear to see what becomes of this latest scandal. And if it's bad enough, I don't doubt that they will cut him. They just cut Luis Pena for his bullshit. Obviously, Luis Pena is not nearly the level of John Jones in terms of skill or hype, but the UFC will cut ties if it harms their brand in any way. And you could argue that it is already done harm to their brand, but innocent until proven guilty. We may not know the whole story yet. The UFC is probably playing it by ear just for a little bit longer. Yusuf. Weili is working on wrestling for training camp. Is that a good idea versus Rose? I think Rose has historically had problems against wrestling. So yes, I do think it's a good idea. And something that I've realized in researching Weili's grappling, particularly her takedowns, is she has very good takedowns. Her setups are a little bit underdeveloped, but once it's in the clinch, she has some really good takedowns, and it comes from her Sanda background. Sanda fighters, it's like Chinese kickboxing, but they're very skilled in like leg sweeps and like throwing the person in such a way where the person hits the ground, but they don't, and they remain standing. It's kind of like the shtick of Sanda and what sets it apart from other kickboxing arts. And Weili is very adept in that. So I actually do think it's kind of smart. Weili has some very good grappling, and you guys will see that when I come out with the video about it. A few more. Tobias, if you are Darren Till's coach, what area would you focus on improving, and who would you have eyes on for his next matchup? Let's see who's in that division real quick. Let me see, because I can't think of middleweight off the top of my head. Rankings. All right, middleweight. Paulo Costa, Jared Cannonier, Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori. He just lost to Brunson. I like the Jack Hermanson matchup. I don't know who Jack Hermanson, if he has anybody scheduled. Sean Strickland's getting good too, man. He already lost to Gastelum. I wouldn't mind a Uriah Hall fight either. I don't know if he's ever fought Hall. I don't think so. Edmund Shabazian. Yeah, those are all good matchups right there. Like, Darren Till is ranked pretty accurately right now. Like, I don't usually agree with rankings too often, but this is pretty accurate. This is making sense to me. This little grouping right here. So I think any one of these guys, aside from Gastelum, because Gastelum already beat him, is a good matchup. But still, he's got to work on his overall ground game. It's a notorious weakness of his. So yeah, you gotta put him with a high level grappling coach. All right. Last question. Izzy versus Wonderboy in a striking battle. Who wins? Wonderboy's the smaller fighter. And he's got a strong kicking game himself, but may end up being more vulnerable to kicks than Adesanya is. So kicking advantage and size advantage goes to Adesanya. I got to pick Adesanya. So that's it, guys. I really appreciate you coming out to this chat. Gastelum actually lost to Till. Did he? My bad. Even so, it was kind of close. But either way, thank you guys for coming to the chat. Had a lot of fun. Hope the construction in the background wasn't too noisy, and I hope I gave some insightful answers to your questions. Make sure to check out the Patreon. As always, I've got some good stuff on there. Check out the channel memberships if you don't feel like using a different website. Check out the merch. Check out all that good stuff. I've got more videos coming very soon, tomorrow, and I'm going to be doing a podcast with Al pretty soon. So, yeah, enjoy, guys, the rest of your day. I'm off to work, and peace out, Girl Scouts.